This is my last video on metaphysics for this Introduction to Philosophy series. Here I give some examples of different metaphysical views that I haven't mentioned previously. The medieval philosopher William of Occam took part in a debate regarding universals. Universals are general concepts such as God. I have previously used that as an example of Plato's view known as idealism. Idealism is a metaphysical theory according to which universals are real. Such theories are also called forms of conceptual realism, which may sound confusing. That is because the term realism has more recently been used to mean views according to which our perceptions, and especially science, provide knowledge about reality, not just some kind of phenomenal illusion. Such views tend to align with materialism in opposition to idealism. Materialism may seem more realistic or believable than idealism, and so it has been dubbed realism. But the word realism is better applied together with some other concept to mean the view that the other concept actually refers to something real. So Plato was a conceptual realist because he believed that concepts have some kind of real existence as ideas in a supernatural reality. Occam did not have such a view, thinking instead that concepts are merely the names of things, with no real existence outside our minds. This view is called nominalism, from the Latin word for name, nomen. Occam's razor is a thinking tool or criterion for judgment. It is the view that of competing theories, the theory that posits fewer entities is to be preferred, other things being equal. Occam thought that the existence of such entities as Plato's ideas is not necessary, so nominalism should be accepted as the simpler theory. In the early modern period, an interesting philosopher with a Jewish background lived in Amsterdam. His name was Baruch, Latinized to Benedictus, Spinoza. He was content with a life of relative poverty, focusing on philosophy instead of seeking wealth. He died rather young from a lung disease that was caused, or at least aggravated, by his work grinding high-quality lenses for microscopes and telescopes. He did manage to irritate a lot of people in that short time, however. He was cast out from the Jewish community first, and then became notorious among Christians as well. His philosophical books were condemned and added to the Catholic Church's list of forbidden books, which, to an intellectual, is like a list of recommended reading. The reason for drawing the religious hate is Spinoza's curious monistic ontology, for which he was called an atheist, even though he referred to his one substance as God. This one substance was infinite and eternal. All things, including people in the world, are just modes of this one substance. There were no separate substances for mind and body, but rather they were both just some of the infinite number of attributes of God. The problem at the time was identifying God with nature, the whole universe. The view that God is nature, the two are identical, is called pantheism. That is tantamount to atheism, especially from a monotheistic point of view. Obviously, Spinoza was accused of atheism, which was a grave accusation at the time, and still is in many countries, unfortunately. Spinoza may have actually been a panentheist. This is the view that God is the whole universe and something more. This conception of God is then larger than that of pantheism. Pantheism is more difficult to distinguish from atheism, which posits no gods at all. In the basic sense, atheism only means no beliefs about God, but in some forms it can be understood as meaning the view that a God does not exist. If one describes the whole of reality as God and identifies God with nature, it is difficult to see how that is different from merely describing the whole of reality as only nature without any gods. In any case, Spinoza's God is not a personal being, which horrified Christians at the time. This God as nature, and probably nothing more, was the God of Spinoza that Albert Einstein once said he believed in. Besides for his definition of God, Spinoza was hated by the religious also because he discarded the ideas of free will, in fact even of will as a faculty of the mind, the immortality of the personal soul, and other dogmas of theology. He only accepted what he could justify philosophically. For him, God had a body, the universe, which also was contrary to most religious teaching. If he hadn't died of the lung disease, he could easily have ended up executed for heresy. Spinoza lived a very modest life, which also caused problems for the religious majority, who could not understand how an atheist could live a moral and happy life. Spinoza was an atheist, at least to them, not believing in the God of Christianity. An atheist was thought to be necessarily a debauched, immoral person who would repent at his deathbed. But Spinoza was respectable throughout his life and never recanted his views. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was perhaps influenced by Spinoza in that he reacted against the atheist Jew, as the latter was often called. At least that is the opinion presented by Matthew Stewart in his wonderfully written The Courtier and the Heretic, Leibniz, Spinoza and the Fate of God in the Modern World. Leibniz presented a very strange metaphysical theory. He was some kind of an idealist in that the truly real things in his metaphysics are minds and their ideas. Even matter and movement aren't real, but only phenomena. Leibniz didn't accept Spinoza's monism or Descartes' dualism, but argued for an extreme form of ontological pluralism. He posits an infinite number of substances, called monads. These are all unique, with qualities changing as the monad develops over time. Strangely, these monads are all somehow intentional. Objects we perceive are apparently only real as objects of the harmonious perceptions of multiple perceiving minds. Ultimately, all things depend on the perception of God, who thus continuously produces the monads in emanations. Sounds like Leibniz was influenced by Neoplatonism and perhaps influenced Bishop Berkeley in turn. What seems most strange about this ontology is that these monads are incapable of interaction with each other. You may recall that this was the main problem for the Cartesian substances. Leibniz solves the problem by claiming that while the monads are windowless in that they do not see outside themselves, they still contain mirrors of the entire universe and so can look inside themselves to see the universe. The mirrors are imperfect, resulting in imperfect understanding of reality. Matthew Stewart explains the weirdness of monadology, as Leibniz called his metaphysics, as follows. The obscurity in the monad mirrors allows us to explain the crucial differences among types of monads. Although in the final analysis monads differ in degree and not kind, they nonetheless fall roughly into three groups, corresponding to what we may think of as rocks, animals, and people. All monads are mind-like to some degree, but only the people-like monads have minds, properly speaking. That is, their mirrors, their faculties of perception and apperception, are developed to the point where they have memory and self-awareness. Animal monads have souls, but not minds, strictly speaking, for their apperception or self-awareness tends to be lacking. Rock-like monads are extremely passive, and so Leibniz has little to say about them. Note, however, that what we think of as an individual human being consists of one mind monad dominating an infinite, swirling agglomeration of rock-like body monads. End quote. If Cartesian dualism suffered from the problem of interaction, it would seem an even greater problem for monadology. How does the mind monad control all those body monads? The weird answer is that it doesn't. Instead, all the monads simply follow their design in a pre-established harmony, which God has set in motion when He created the universe. The monads do not interact. They only seem to interact with each other. Leibniz certainly wasn't interested in using Occam's razor to look for simple explanations. His Baroque metaphysics seems like a convoluted attempt to save religious dogmas like the personality of God and the immortality of the personal soul. He didn't quite save the freedom of will, only the appearance of freedom, everything being preordained. He was a Protestant, at least in name, and not a Catholic, so perhaps he didn't see that as a problem. Christianity had fragmented as the result of the birth of Protestantism. Leibniz hoped to be able to unify it again, and even eventually unify all peoples of the world under the same religion. He had high hopes of Chinese thinkers coming to the same conclusions as him, which would enable them to join his one religion. Understandably, Leibniz wanted to prevent future wars among Christians, but somehow did not have a problem with throwing non-Christians, especially atheists, under the proverbial bus. Unfortunately, the same sentiment is still common. Among the oddest claims made by Leibniz is that we live in the best of all possible worlds. World here means the totality of existence. God could not have created a better world because He is supposed to be perfectly good and so would necessarily create the best world, if any at all. Somehow, because of this view, Leibniz has been called an optimist, but to me the view sounds extremely pessimistic. After all, it seems to follow that it is impossible for us to make this world any better than it is. If even God could not make a better world, how would we? The famous philosopher of science, Karl Popper, is also known for his analysis of social ontology. It is fairly obvious that there are social constructs, such as those referred to with concepts like nation, marriage, law, money, and president. In what sense do such things exist? For example, money is not quite real in the way people have believed. It is mostly a social construct based on trust. How are we supposed to think about such entities then? Popper's answer involved 3 worlds, which he did not bother to name except by numbering them as follows. World 1 is the world of physical objects and events. World 2 is the mental world of thoughts and consciousness. World 3 is the cultural world, which contains abstract things like scientific theories and other cultural products, such as mythologies. The mental world, too, is not to be confused with any idealistic notion, as it is instantiated in the world 1 of objects like us. The world 3 as well is only codified in books and such objects of the world 1 and not some fluffy spiritual realm. At least as far as I understand, these 3 worlds are merely an analytical tool to make sense of a fundamentally material reality. But the analysis is necessary, according to Popper, because of the different ways objects in these worlds behave. World 3 objects are originally mental products of World 2 that have become cultural objects. They then have causal influence even in World 1. For example, an artist paints a picture, which is clearly a World 1 object, oil colors on canvas, for example. The object was created through conscious, World 2 effort, perhaps in order to express an emotion or even call to political action. The picture thus created can become a well-known work of art, World 3, referred to by others, influencing other artists, and so on. Photographs and different versions of the same work of art can be produced and disseminated. The cultural object of World 3 being so used is not literally the physical object, the painting on canvas of World 1. I believe I have spoken enough about metaphysics for now. I will next turn to ethics and social philosophy. Stay tuned. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.